that, and good evening, good plenary.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks for coming to this session where we pay tribute in memory of Roberto Tempo, a dear friend who was a personal friend of mine and also loved by the community, both the Ifac and the broader control community. And it was a devastating loss when we got the news on January the 14th of this year. This, Roberto actually was scheduled to give a semi-plenary, a plenary exactly on Monday. And I thank the organizers for scheduling this session so that we can really celebrate his accomplishments and his contributions to the profession, both in research as well as in service, as well as to education. So this actually opening picture that you see is from the CDC in 2013, where he was the general co-chair, and it was a very well-run conference, and he was active in the Control System Society of IEEE, as well as IFAC in various capacities, as I'll try to briefly summarize. So Alberto, Isidori, and I put this session together, and the way we organized it is really what we would call the different chapters in the research life of Roberto Tempo. And this is all in, there are 4 main speakers. Each speaker will talk about 10 minutes, and they'll discuss from their perspective the contributions of Roberto from a very close perspective, because they actually collaborated with him. And I said this is in chronological order, but also it shows a progression of topics and topical areas, and it's also shows a clear indication of the diversity of the research activities of Roberto. So this is the order in which the presentations will be made. So I'll start just briefly talking about Roberto's life story, very brief. You'll see in the proceedings of this conference, also on the website, a 2-page article that we wrote, which actually has more details on his life story, as well as the contents of the presentations that will be made here. So he was born in 1956 and received his EE degree from Politecnico di Torino, and shortly after he joined CNR, IEIT, and since 1991 he was the director of research of systems and computer engineering. He held many visiting positions and research positions at Tsinghua in China, the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the Kyoto University, University of Tokyo, my own university, it's the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and the Columbia University and Research Organization. And I should say in this context that we met when they were visiting us in Urbana-Champaign. We met with his wife, Maria Cristina, and I would like to actually recognize in this context her, and she's here in the audience, and also their daughter, Julia. He received several paper awards, outstanding paper awards from Automatica and the Control Systems magazine, and you'll hear more about these from the other speakers, and he was elected as a distinguished member of IEEE Control Systems Society and corresponding member of the Academy of Sciences Institute of Bologna. And he was a fellow of Ifac and a fellow of IEEE. I have this one with IEEE in a different color because it turned out that the year when he was presented with the certificate IEEE. This was in Sydney, Australia, and I happened to be the society president at the time. Normally the IEEE president would make these presentations, but he had missed his flight, and so therefore I had the pleasant task of presenting it to Roberto, which is a memory that will stay with me forever. He was, as I indicated, several activities within the profession, particularly with Automatica and the IEEE Control Systems Society. His Automatica affiliation started in 1992 as an associate editor and all the way to editor-in-chief in 2015. And his affiliation with the IEEE CSS has been in different capacities, and most lately as president of the society. And as I indicated, he was general co-chair of the CDC in 2013 and was also the program chair in 2005. He was technical notes and communiques editor for the TAC, and then also was a senior editor until 2014. Now, his research focus and activities, as I indicated, was on a very diverse set of topics, and if I have to summarize it in one bullet, it's on the analysis and design of complex network systems subject to uncertainty, and various related applications within information technology. And more recently, these included the PageRank computation in the Google search engine, and you'll hear about this, distributed localization of wireless sensor networks, and opinion dynamics in social networks, which was his more and most recent work. And he was actually very proud of publishing a paper in the justifiably so, in Science on belief systems, and he also was co-author on a book on randomized algorithms, and you'll hear about this, which had 2 editions. So I'll stop here and turn the podium over to Alberto Isidori, who is going to talk about Roberto's contributions to the Italian control community. Alberto.
Thank you, Tamer. Tamer has summarized it in an excellent way, the profound and lasting impact that Roberto's personality has left on each of us and on the community as a whole. From the very first moment of that tragic Sunday in January, when the terrible news of his tragic loss was propagating as a shock wave, we all had a single thought: it is an irreplaceable loss. True leaders are people who are able to inspire confidence in others, and who, practicing high moral and professional values, set an example that persuades others to pursue good things for the community in which they act. In Roberto, these qualities could be found at the highest possible level. I would like to add to Tamer's introduction a few words summarizing my personal experience of working with Roberto in the Italian NMO of Ifac. At the time of the Ifac Congress in Beijing, Edoardo Mosca, who at that time was the representative of the National Research Council of Italy, which is formerly the NMO of Ifac, set up a small committee consisting of a few people with the purpose of determining the feasibility of an Ifac Congress in Italy. That was a delicate task because in the recent past, 2 consecutive bids from the Italian NMO had been turned down. In the months that followed, Roberto's ability to lead people toward a common goal proved to be of fundamental importance in that. In a short speech that I gave at the time of the 50th anniversary of Ifac in Heidelberg, I had the opportunity to observe that the proposal of an of a Congress of Ifac in Italy, a proposal that at that time had already been accepted, was a rare example, I think I say the miracle, of Italian singing in choir. As a matter of fact, the whole history of Italy is a history of individualism with scarce propension toward collaboration for a common goal. This was not the case for the Ifac Congress in Italy. And it is not exaggerated to say that Roberto had a major role in all of that, from multiple viewpoints. He could have rightly claimed to be the candidate president. He had all the appropriate qualities for such a role: a strong scientific stature, a wide network of international relations, the skills of an outstanding leader. In such a role, he would have undoubtedly succeeded, as it was the case just a few years later with the president of the CSS of IEEE. However, he decided not to do this. Rather, he gently stepped aside. He repeatedly insisted and convinced me that I should have taken this job. And he did this by means of unselfish and generous arguments that I will never forget. Then, when the issue of choosing the location of the Congress came, again, he set aside the option of having it in his hometown of Torino, a city that, in the meanwhile, was experiencing a strong renewal with abundant facilities set up for the Olympics. And he suggested rather Milano, in acknowledgement of the importance of the Milano school in the Italian control community. Roberto's soft manners and vision were instrumental in gathering a national consensus toward the proposal that was finalized pretty soon, presented at the Friendship Evening in Barcelona in 2002, and eventually successful in 2 years. Working with Roberto during my term as a president was a sheer pleasure. We dubbed the year 2010 as the year of the 2 presidents, myself president of Ifac and him president of IEEE CSS. This was a recognition of the Italian control community that would have been unthinkable a few years later. We Italians were extremely proud to claim that the first not English native tongue president of the CSS was an Italian. One of his major concerns when he was president of the CSS was to foster stronger and steady relationship among the 2 communities. In that, we were pretty successful, as various common initiatives, notably the Congress in Milano, have shown. I had the privilege, and this picture that you can see was taken at the Congress, at the President Banquet in Milano in 2011. I had the privilege of spending a few days in Torino last November. This was probably the longest sequence of interaction that we had. It seemed to be destined to set the basis of an even stronger friendship. I still have in my mind the unforgettable image of his smile, an evening when we dined together and together with Christina. We left each other saying, we'll see each other again in Toulouse. Tragically, nature has determined differently. Well, I would like to conclude saying that with the loss of Roberto, the Italian control community has lost his true champion. Thank you all for your attention.
Okay, so we're going to have 4 presentations now by individuals who have worked closely and collaborated with Roberto throughout the years. And again, as I indicated, this is in chronological order. And the first One is Bob Barmish, who's with the University of Wisconsin.
Thank you very much, Tamer. As Tamer indicated, we could roughly divide Roberto's research career roughly into 4 chapters, and each of us are representing one of those chapters. There's overlap, of course, and I would like to basically give my perspective on a decade of collaborative research with Roberto. But there was also 30 years of friendship which surrounded that, particularly so because we started interacting so early in time. I should note that this is a selective sampling of my personal favorites. There are many, many pieces of work we did together and events we attended together which won't even be mentioned. And roughly speaking, this covers our decade where we were interacting the most, 1986 to 96. Our first meeting occurred actually at Columbia University. Roberto was visiting at that time, and he was a 28-year-old visiting faculty member at Columbia University. I was a little bit older with a new job at Wisconsin. And that was what you might call the end of a chapter of Roberto's work prior to the 4 that we're discussing today. We might call it the set theoretic chapter, which led in to where he was coming from when the 2 of us started interacting. There was a period where he worked intensively with some of the great Italian research colleagues, most notably going back to Mario Milanese, and then a number of others, Donati, Carlucci, Menga, Maro, Bellaforte, Ficino, and others. That was what I saw coming in. And we had one thing in front of us, something known as Karatanov's theorem, which sparked a decade of our research together. I'm not going to bother you with much technical detail other than basically mentioning that this was the first result which motivated the 2 of us to interact heavily. And it was basically telling you that if you have an interval polynomial and you want to check for robust stability, so if you have uncertainty in the coefficients and you want to know if things are stable robustly, you only need to check for distinguished vertex polynomials that are generated with a certain recipe. And that was a takeoff point for us. And that kind of led to many other things. It's interesting that Roberto's first visit to Madison had some irony attached to it, because he came and we had an expectation of working very heavily on these sorts of things. And for reasons I don't fully remember in great detail, we got diverted and worked instead for that multi-week period with my colleague Chris DeMarco. And we did a paper which I guess I would say from my present perspective is going to languish in obscurity, but there were other things. One big benefit was that during that visit, Roberto turned me on to both BitNet and LaTeX. So I was very happy about that at that period in time. The period 87 to 89 was undoubtedly our most intense. That was really intense. I remember practically doing nothing else but interacting with Roberto during that period. We were working on various extensions, generalizations of robust stability. Basically, it was frequent visits from Madison to Torino, back to Madison, co-organization of sessions and workshops. And of course, this grew the more you collaborate with someone. If the collaboration is good, it often grows into a great friendship. And that's what happened here. Basically, there were many great research walks in the mountains surrounding his cottage at Ceresoli. This is basically the type of place it was. We'd go out into the mountains for a few days, drink a lot of grappa, and actually formulated one of our best results, which was unpublished ever. We called it the grappa conjecture. I can't actually recall what the conjecture was right now, but I know we worked heavily on it for months and talked about it for years to follow. And that was kind of the surrounding things. A second personal favorite from my intense interactions with him in 87 to 89 was this problem we worked on. We called it fondly the pitfall paper. It was a collaboration with Pramod Karganikar, and we had great fun working on that. The intense collaboration with him began at a workshop in Bremen, and it was basically, without getting technical, to show that when you calculate the robustness margin for stability, it can actually be a discontinuous function of the data. That turned out to be a rather controversial paper. I remember the CDC surrounding it in Tampa being crammed with people in the room, arguing, debating. One of my all-time favorite memories, and a paper on it which appeared a year later. A third favorite from this very intense period was our collaboration with Fiat. We actually worked a lot with them, and we did some development of their four-wheel steering system, and the other area we worked on was idle engine control. And the third thing, which I personally found a lot of fun, is we were bringing in speakers to Fiat every once in a while, maybe every few months. I think we had like 3 a year for almost 3 years, and we brought in some of the great names in our field who would give short courses, and we of course enjoyed sitting in those short courses as well, and that was definitely a high as well. So then we go on to the period 89 to 92, which I would characterize as a continuation of this firm line of research we had been working on with this emphasis on robust stability, and we kind of moved our attention into designing of controllers. If a system is robustly stable, maybe you can fiddle with the parameters of the system and actually make it stable by design. So it moved a little bit from analysis to design. And that period was highlighted by a personal favorite of mine. We made a number of visits to DLR in Oberpfaffenhofen, just outside of Munich, and we collaborated a lot with Jürgen Ackermann, who hosted us for weeks at a time. I remember having my 40th birthday party, was celebrating with Roberto at that time, and I also remember Roberto referring fondly to Ackermann as Aki, if you see him one of these days. So we interacted pretty heavily, and of course our trips were punctuated by great German beer. What I remember a lot is that this one of the best beer drinking places in the world, by my reckoning, Andex, was close by, and after a hard day's work, what could be better than to unwind at Annex? So I remember great beer drinking memories with Roberto surrounding our visits to that. Finally, a second favorite from that period emanates from our interactions with Chris Hollett. We tried to extend some of the interval polynomial material to actually plants where you have a feedback loop. And we worked on robust stability of a feedback loop with a first order compensator, and again came up with what we called an extreme point result, meaning you only had to test 16 plants. When you wrap a first order compensator cascaded with a unity feedback around this interval plant, you can actually come up with a very simple test for robust stability. So we used to call that our 16 plant theorem. And who could ever forget Ifac, 1992, Ifac Sydney 1993. Roberto and I really enjoyed that a lot because we were honored at that Congress for a paper we wrote in Automatica. And one of my memories of that was we were standing there getting ready to go into the Opera House in Sydney, and we were really torn. Should we put on that tie or shouldn't we? We had got to the point of putting on jackets, and we finally did put on the tie. I guess we shook hands with a number of Australian luminaries. Then we get to the very end of that intense collaboration period with Roberto. Basically, we were moving away from the standard definitions of robustness and trying to introduce probabilistic considerations. And that brought us into an area that we initially called probabilistic robustness and later called it distributional robustness. Instead of being robust with respect to parameters and ranges, you try to get robustness with respect to probability distributions. And that period transitioned into intense collaborations, more Roberto after 97 than myself. So I had previously been collaborating with my Russian colleagues, many of them, but most notably Boris Polyak and Pavel Sherbakov. And Roberto had got to know them over the years, and in the years following my chapter with Roberto, Roberto had some new and heavy interactions with my colleagues from Moscow Institute of Control Sciences. How do I summarize? I thought long and hard about what this final slide should say, and Christina, thank you for sending me an email which solved the problem for me. Basically, I received this in an email, and it captures my thoughts better than I ever could have composed myself. So Christina describes beautiful moments spent together, the fun we had together, the fun you and Roberto had in working together, talking incessantly, having fun, running, writing, conjecturing. It was not work, it was passion and fun and real friendship. Since '97, we haven't collaborated, but we stayed in constant communication. And I'll just wrap up with a few photos. Here we're celebrating Ted Davison's accomplishments at the CDC in Maui. This one is very interesting because Roberto had a very indirect relationship with my father for many years. They shared the love of skiing and the outdoors, and there were communications back and forth, even contemplation of a ski trip, which never occurred. And finally, at the ACC in Montreal, they got to meet over steak dinner, and we all really enjoyed that. This is a picture of my wife Joan and Roberto and myself undergoing festivities related to the Bodhi Prize at CDC Florence. More recently, we attended a great celebration in honor of Boris Polyak in Russia, and here's just a couple of pictures basically visiting the Moscow sites. We had a day when we were tourists per se, and just wonderful memories. And most recently of all, we were together for a day prior to the ICCA in Kathmandu, Nepal. Roberto and I each arrived a day early, and we actually went out. We got a guide for the day and looked at about a 50-mile radius of Kathmandu and just had a wonderful time together. So the summer of 2016, we actually met for just a couple of days up in Chamonix. I was there with my wife Joan, and Roberto knows the area inside out, and he graciously showed us some of his favorite trails, and we had wonderful memories hiking there. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm going to pass the torch to Fabrizio Dabbene.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Roberto. And the next speaker is Fabrizio, and who has been geographically the closest to Roberto among the four speakers.
Okay, I'm really honored to be here to present you the second chapter of Roberto's life, which is the chapter that had me really involved in, and this his legacy related to randomized method for analysis and design of certain systems. I have to say that Roberto was really a pioneer of this area of research. I think he and some few others really planted a seed of this tree that grew and had many, many branches. And I cannot hope in 10 minutes to lead you all over these branches. So I decided to go and follow the path, the branch given by his publications. So I met Roberto around '94. This picture is a little bit later, but I mean, this is how it looked like. He looked like then, and as you can see, if you look at all the pictures that we saw, it never changed. I mean, that's something that I always strike me. Is always has been the same. And I was a student then, and I was looking for a thesis. And actually, I was talking with friends, and they told me about this guy that was working. He was not teaching in Polytechnic, so they didn't know him directly. But they told me I was looking for something related to control. I said, there is this control guy. Go and talk to him. And we went. We discussed with him, and I was really impressed. I think there are a few things that impressed during this first presentation. So he wrote on a piece of paper and explained me robust control of a simple polynomial, and it was very clear, very calm, but at the same time you can feel the passion. I mean, you can feel that you really like the stuff, and this is something that he was able to pass on, and there was immediately, so I already, actually I have to confess, I already accepted another thesis, but I canceled that one, and I took the thesis with Roberto, and that was the right choice, I think. And so we started working on robust control. I was banging my head on a problem of robust stability, of polytoph of matrices. We were doing branch and bound, and I wasn't going anywhere, basically. And then it came back from a workshop. I cannot identify exactly which one, because it was, for me, all this was like magic. And I think he met people, Sagar and other people working on statistical learning, and he came back very excited and said, okay, we have to change everything. We have to change our paradigm. We have to do something different. We're asking too much if we want to really do robust control. And actually, this was exactly the point where Bob left us, and the field of robust control was really mature at the time, and very important results had been reached. But at the same time, people were starting realizing that they sort of reached some barrier which was very hard to break. Because on the one side, I think the two main problems that were encountered were, on the one side, the conservatism. The fact that if you want to guarantee performance for all the uncertainty, and the uncertainty is entering in a bad way in your system, the only thing you can do is to embed your uncertainty in a bigger set. And so you are accounting in your design and your analysis for uncertainties that you will never meet in practice. And if you want to reduce this conservatism, so reduce this embedding, you have to introduce some shifting, some decay iterations, you name it. And but you end up encountering heavy computations. So we were doing branch and bounds, and it was taking forever. So the idea was that Roberto came out, and a few people at that time came out, was really to look for a different paradigm. And this is the first paper, one of the first papers published on this topic. I would say that this is the only result that I will present. I would say that this is not the result that is very interesting, but because a similar result appeared at the same time. It was really the time where people was looking at this kind of problem. But the fact that the formulation of this result, when I was looking now for preparing this slide, is so actual. It's exactly what we are continuing to sell. So the result is very simple. You have a performance function, a function that measures the performance of your system. So you have a value of the uncertainty, and you have a given performance. And you want to evaluate, and the lower it is performance, the better it is. And you want to evaluate the worst case performance. So how bad the performance can be. And if you try to do that for many uncertainties and different and nonlinear functions, this is a very hard problem. So the solution proposed is really simple, is really basic. You generate samples, you say, I know something more about the uncertainty. I know the probability distribution of the uncertainty. I generate samples of the uncertainty. I measure the performance for this sample, and I say, okay, my empirical estimate of the worst case performance is just the worst that I encounter. So this is the most simple randomized algorithm that you can think of. And then if you want to evaluate how good is this estimate f hat n, what you can, since you applied a probabilistic method, you can assess, you would like to assess some probabilistic idea of this performance. And so what you can say is that, okay, you cannot see that, but you ask, what is the probability that a new uncertainty that I didn't consider breaks the performance, or gives a level of performance which is worse? And this is what we will call later the probability of violation. And you would like this to be very small, less than epsilon. So there is a less than epsilon over there. And the result is very simple. It tells you that if you take a number of samples which is larger than 1 over epsilon log 1 over delta, you guarantee that this performance, the probability of encountering a performance less than the one that you estimated is less than epsilon, and you can bound this probability by delta, 1 minus delta, that should be there, sorry. So, and if you look at this result, there's already everything that people will consider in this area. So first of all, there is a randomized algorithm. You're taking random samples. You're interested in explicit bounds on the so-called sample complexity. So you all know that if you take infinite samples, at the end you will get the true worst case performance. But Roberto was coming from a bus control, was a very practical person, and said, okay, no, I want to know if I take n samples what I get. And you have the possibility of failure. So you had, you knew what you paid the fact that you could fail, but what you get is that the bound that you have there does not depend on the size of the uncertainty, on the way the uncertainty enters into the plane. So it is something that we were saying, and people was saying is breaking the course of dimensionality, which is the goodness of randomized methods. And then this result, Roberto and our group continued working on the result. We formalized everything in this paper, and then, but this was all analysis. So the problem was, okay, but the key challenge is design. Can we do the same for design? And it was in that time that I think that you already know that the collaboration between Roberto and Boris, it was that time that Boris was visiting us in Torino, and they came up with this idea, which is very basic. I have the slides, but I will not go into the detail, but the main idea is that at that time there were some ideas which were, for instance, proposing a double randomization. You randomize the uncertainty and you randomize your controller and you choose the best one. But the idea of Roberto was, oh, come on, we have been working for years in robust control. We have developed very strong methods in robust control, convex optimization approach to robust control. We would like to use this knowledge. And so the probabilistic design proposed by Boris and Roberto, it's really that. It's a mix. It's the good mix of randomization and convex optimization. And it contains in nuce all the other results that came later. And starting from this result, Roberto really we started disseminating these ideas. We had workshops. We had a very nice workshop at Sydney, if Boris, you remember. And then he visited Illinois, and he published results on switching systems, on networks, on circuit analysis, on fixed order design, on UAV control, and just to name some. And at the end, we ended up writing a book on this, and the book was, I think, it became a reference for this area, and we had a second edition later on. And but Roberto was telling, so if we want to produce something which people will use, we need also to give them tools. And so he was very insisting that we should code all the results that he had. And so that's how the randomized algorithm control toolbox for Matra came out from. And you see here a picture of the main contributors of, you can see a younger Pavel and a younger myself. And after that, we had a collaboration here with LAS in Toulouse, where they have a toolbox for robust control. So we decided to match the two toolboxes together, and we had a Romulok. And you may recognize the guy, which is the author of Romulok. He didn't have this funny beard yet, but he was a very strong contributor for this software development. And okay, then I would say Roberto moved to other chapters, but still, if you look at, these are some of the recent publications of Roberto, and if you, on this topic, and if you look at the dates, they are very, very recent. So there was still much to say in this, and I think Roberto had still much to say on this area. And this is when really these results are moving to applications. So we have stochastic model predictive control, anti-wind-up, UAVs, estimation, because the problem of filtering and estimation is also really important. And when I was preparing this talk, I wanted to start by saying what did I learn from Roberto. I started thinking, what did I learn from Roberto? Then I realized that this would have been only one slide, because I learned everything from him. And Roberto started as a mentor. He became a colleague and a friend, and it was really, really nice working for him. But if I wanted to leave a message to the young people, this is a paper we were working together with Wen Zhao, and this was like ready version, but if you send him the version that you think it's, okay, this is the last one, it still makes changes, it still made changes and comments. And so we had a joke that we considered the revision process ended when he made a comment that reinstated the previous version. So it's okay, we are done. And so what I learned is to be, and I'm not very good in that, but I'm striving to this, to be careful and precise in the writing, to be clear in writing, and I learned the importance to talk to people. And more than that, I don't remember, I was discussing with somebody, and he was telling, Roberto was very good at listening. And this is very important. When you talk to people, also listening to people. And Roberto told me to be ready to serve your society as a reviewer, as an associate editor, and everything. And so I'm very proud of showing you this picture that I think you already saw. But this is, I think this is something that I felt like an achievement, because it was me as vice president for publication giving an award to Roberto, presenting an award to Roberto and Hideaki for the Control System Market Best Paper Awards 2 years ago. And yes, I think he still had many things to give to our society, but I think this, and especially to me. But this is for another time.
Thank you, Fabrizio. The picture that you saw just before this slide provides a very nice segue actually to the next speaker. And he there was met Roberto during his stay at Illinois, and then they immediately found out that they were a perfect match in exploring new areas, entering into new topics, and then the rest is history.
Okay, my name is Hideaki Ishii. I'm from Tokyo Institute of Technology. It's a great honor to be here to talk about my research experience with Roberto. This is the third chapter in this session. It essentially covers the last 10 years or so since we started working on the PageRank computation. So as Tamer just mentioned, I met him in Illinois in 2002 when I was a postdoc there working with Tamer, and Roberto was a visiting scholar there. We immediately started working together on randomized algorithms, more in the context of what Fabrizio just talked about. But I think it was a good mixture because he contributed from the randomized algorithm side. I could provide him problems related to network control. So, but our collaboration continued from that time in a very consistent way over the last 15 years, exactly 15 years actually. So Roberto was not only an excellent collaborator, but he was a very supportive mentor and also a wonderful friend. We had a lot of good moments whenever we met to work together, when we visited each other, or we met at conferences, workshops, and so on. And as a young researcher, it meant a lot to me, and I was very fortunate to have been exposed to his very generous and honest personality, and also to his genuine passion for research and life in general. This is a picture from the CDC in Italy. So now on the PageRank algorithm problem, it was Roberto's idea to work on the PageRank algorithm. And I say this because I was a little bit suspicious in the beginning. It was not related to control. It was very new to us, and also to most people in the control community. But it's a very well-known problem. It's very important for the search engine of Google. So this algorithm quantifies the importance or popularity of web pages in the web. It was developed and proposed by the co-founders of Google, Brin and Page, in '98. And it's said to be still one of the 200 signals used for ranking the search results when you use Google engine. The interesting part is that the PageRank algorithm does not use anything about the content of the web pages, but it's determined only by the link structure of the web. So that means if you have a web page that has a lot of incoming links, that makes your web page more popular, and therefore you have a higher PageRank. A very nice way to explain the random surfer model. This is actually the way that Roberto really liked to talk about this, is through this random surfer model. It's a very fascinating way to understand this problem. So we think about a surfer who randomly browses the web. So each time he visits a page, let's say page number 1 here, he will look at the links and then chooses one randomly at equal probability. So this surfer might visit page number 4 and then page number 5 and so on. But sometimes he might get stuck when he comes to a page which is like a PDF file or so. Usually we would push the back button, and we will artificially introduce a link that corresponds to this. And PageRank is essentially the frequency of the surfer, this random surfer, to be visiting the web pages. But it's very clear that just by following the links, it's not possible to visit all the pages on the web. So we modify this framework by introducing a jumps. So the server might start visiting pages, but at some point he decides to go to a completely arbitrary page in the web, and so he will jump with a certain probability. And then he will continue randomly surfing. So with this, you can specify the probabilities for this surfer to be surfing in terms of probability. And we will get a mathematical definition, which is based on this surfer as a Markov chain. And PageRank is actually defined as the stationary distribution of this server to be visiting the pages. The computation of the PageRank is based on the power method, which is just a simple discrete time iteration, where and we do this because it's a Markov chain. This matrix M is the transition matrix, which is, in this case, is positive, but obviously it's a column stochastic matrix. And that means that we can obtain the PageRank vector by the Perron's theorem. And as you can see, it's a very simple problem that you can even explain to the first-year undergraduate students. It's a very fascinating problem in that respect. And at this point, I think many of you would recognize that there's a lot of similarities with the multi-agent consensus problem because there's an underlying graph representing the web, which can be seen as a network for the agents. There's the stochastic matrix, usually in the consensus problem. This will be row stochastic, whereas here it's column stochastic, but this difference is rather minor. And then the most important part, I think, which is kind of unusual in the context of Markov chain, is that each page or each state in the Markov chain, they have some computation available locally because your web page will be on the server. So I think when you see this, I think it's very natural to try to think about distributed computation of the PageRank, and this is exactly what we did. So, the algorithm that we propose is distributed and randomized. Essentially, we treat the web pages as agents. They will be communicating to each other over the links, and they will make updates in the values, which will eventually converge to their own PageRank values. Now, the part that was, I think, that was very important for Roberto is that the time for the transmissions of these agents is randomized, which is sometimes called gossip algorithm, very commonly employed in the multi-agent literature. This was the connection to his prior works on randomized algorithms. And I think when we saw that gossiping is popular in agents, that's the point when Roberto thought that this should be a good way to continue his research. So this line of research turned out to be very fruitful. We made a lot of publications, also together with other colleagues, such as Hervé Vai, and also Chiara Ravazzi, Paolo Frasca. We had some other works related to uncertain links in the early times. And the highlight is that we had a IEEE Control System Magazine paper that appeared in 2014. This is a review paper summarizing our results. And then, as mentioned earlier, we received a Outstanding Paper Award for this article. In the last few slides, I'd like to mention that Roberto had a lot of connections with the control community in Japan, and we're very grateful for his contributions. So this is a picture from the time that the IEEE Multi-Conference on Systems and Control was held in Yokohama in 2010. The general chair was Masayuki Fujita. Roberto was the CSS president at the time, so he helped us a lot with the organization. This is a picture from one of the many visits he made to Japan. This is from an excursion that we made with Shinji Hara. And then this is, he had a chance to meet a geisha, or more precisely a maiko, in Japanese at one of the parties that was held in Japan as well. And then he also promoted more at a larger scale research collaboration between the Japanese and Italian researchers through a project that he PI'd together with Yasumasa Fujisaki. And we made a trip to Torino. We had a workshop, and then on the next day we made this visit to the hydropower plants in the Gran Paradiso area, which is a little bit northwest of Torino. And this is actually the, so we had a group picture here. This was in just November 2016, a few months before Roberto's passing away. And it's quite a shock for us, because the place that he fell was just behind these mountains, not more than a few kilometers away. So it's very hard to believe that this became a last visit for me to visit Roberto in his hometown, Torino, Italy. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.
The last speaker is Anton, who is is going to talk about the last chapter, actually, in Roberto's initiation of new research. And I mentioned at the beginning that Roberto was scheduled actually to present a plenary here at this Congress, and it was going to be based on joint work with Anton.
Thank you so much, Tamer. For me, it's a great pleasure, great honor, great privilege to be here and to give a brief talk about most recent Roberto's result. Roberto was a very social person, interested in all aspects of social life, in history, in politics, in economy, and of course it's not surprising that dynamics of social processes became his passion in the last years. What is surprising is the number of results Roberto managed to get in this very new, quite young direction of control theory, in spite of just a few years fate gave him to work on this. Before recollecting my cooperation with Roberto, I would like to say a few words about general background, general theory Roberto worked on. So his main efforts were focused on so-called SINT, social influence network theory, developed by a group of Professor Noah Friedkin, working at the Department of Sociology of the University of California, Santa Barbara. This theory have been developed starting in the 1990s. However, it was almost unexplored by a control community till very late, very recent years. This theory gives simple yet instructive microscopic or agent-based models of opinion formation and social power. Those models, in fact, are concerned with the following basic questions. How do individual opinions influence each other? Whether and why agents reach consensus or fail to reach it and disagree. Roberto's contributions to this theory, which in fact, unlike many other approaches to social dynamics modeling, has been also validated by extensive experiments with both small size and medium size group. Can be classified into three major classes. First of all, some basic system theoretic properties of the dynamic models proposed by Friedkin group have been established. What is more important, Roberto and his co-authors proposed several novel models for opinion dynamics, seriously extending the Friedkin's models. Those models include gossip-based models and models with interrelated topics, which will be discussed later. The last class of results, which I will not discuss today, is concerned with numerous and important relations between PageRank centrality, Hideaki just told us about, and opinion dynamics. So probably one of the most important models proposed by Friedkin's group is the so-called Friedkin-Johnson model. Johnson is now a professor emeritus in mathematics at University of California, Santa Barbara. So this model is very similar to the what is called discrete time consensus algorithm, or DeGroot opinion pooling, and it includes just two parameters. The first of those parameters is a stochastic matrix of influence weights, W, and the second parameter is the matrix, diagonal matrix of so-called susceptibilities. Those are numbers varying between 0 and 1. Considering this vector dynamics, component-wise, one may notice that this susceptibility is nothing else than the level of agent stubbornness or reluctance to assimilate the other's opinions. So the agent with minimal susceptibility, zero susceptibility, is what is called fully stubborn agent or zealot. So it is stuck at his or her initial opinion and never changes this opinion. Agent with maximal possible susceptibility assimilates opinions using well-known averaging rule, DeGroot's averaging rule, and in general, agent may play both strategy, play a sort of big strategy. So to some extent, it assimilates. Okay, you cannot see it. It assimilates the other's opinion. On the other hand, it still retains some level of anchorage at his or her initial opinion. For this model, Roberto and his co-authors, in fact, this work has been started during Paolo Frasca's visit to Santa Barbara, established an important stability criterion for this model. You can say, come on, but stability is a trivial property. You just need to calculate the spectral radius of the matrix A multiplied by W, and if it's less than 1, if all eigenvalues belong to the unit cycle, the system is Schusterable. That's of course true, but first of all, how can we compute this spectral radius for a huge social network? And second, what does it mean in terms of social network itself? And in fact, a very elegant graph theoretic condition for stability has been obtained. Its sufficiency has been proved in the conference paper published by Paolo Frasca, Chiara Ravazzi, Roberto, and Hideaki. This paper was published on Ifac workshop on network control systems in 2013. And this criterion is as follows. The system is stable if and only if stubborn individuals influence directly or indirectly all the other agents. What does it mean in terms of graph? It means that if you consider the graph of influence whose arcs correspond to positive entries of the influence matrix, from any agent there exists a path to some stubborn agent, fully or partially stubborn, having coefficient A less than 1. For instance, the solvers holds for this graph, right? From any node, you can find a walk to this stubborn adjoint number 15. In fact, this condition is also necessary, not only sufficient. And if it holds, the opinions obviously converge. The opinions obviously converge. But in fact, the converge statement is not true. So the full class of convergent model is broader, and it was fully described in our joint paper with Roberto, which has been just published in IEEE Transactions, in issue number 5 in this year. And now it's time to talk about our collaboration with Roberto. How did it start? In fact, it was started by Roberto's talk on the summer school organized by Institute of Control Sciences in Moscow. And in fact, this talk was based on this conference paper and considered stability condition and results on convergence of some gossip-based models. You can see one of the photos of Roberto with organizers of this school. Unfortunately, Boris Polyak is not on this photo, but you can see Elena Gryazina, who actually the second main organizer of the school. You can see Pavel Sherbakov, who was already mentioned, and our colleague Sergei Parsegov is also here. And I dare to say that this Roberto's visit to Moscow has opened new age, new perspective of social influence network theory. And this visit was continued by our visit to Italy by Sergei Parsegov and myself. This photo actually, this photo was taken on the roof of one of Politecnico di Torino's building in November 2014. During this visit, we discussed a novel model of opinion evolution, in fact, extending significantly the Friedkin-Johnson model. It looks very similar, but instead of vector of opinions, it involves matrix of opinions. In fact, the rows of this matrix are multidimensional opinions representing positions of individuals on several issues. And those issues can in fact be somehow dependent, logically dependent, for instance. In the simplest situations, they're completely independent, but in general, you have this matrix C, which is not necessarily stochastic, in fact, so I will not give exact condition when this model is stable, but in fact, if the original Friedkin-Johnson model is stable and C is stochastic, for instance, matrix, or has infinity norm less than 1, such a system is also stable. And Noah Friedkin has found a beautiful and important application for this class of dynamics, which led to what he called network science on belief system. So a belief system is a set of mutually supportive and logically consistent beliefs held by individuals on several, in general, mutually dependent issues, mutually dependent topics. And the example included in our paper, which was published in Science magazine in October 2016, is the following. Consider the following three statements actively discussed in American society in 2003, before American invasion to Iraq. So the first of this statement is that Saddam Hussein had a stockpile of weapons of mass destruction. The second of that statement is that those weapons presented the danger to the region and to the world in whole. And the final statement is that the preemptive invasion of Iraq would be a just war. Upon analyzing the results of opinion poll, Noah Friedkin conjectured that the well-known Colin Powell speech and Security Council of United Nations, in fact, imposed a sort of dependency, structured somehow the public opinion on these three statements. So the conjecture was that after Colin Powell's speech, the belief in the first statement completely determined belief in statements 2 and 3, which corresponds, in fact, to this special metric C of rank 1. And we have made a simulation, which also included in this report published in Science. And the results of this simulation, in fact, are similar, are highly correlated with real opinion pooling. So consider first the situation where agents are not stubborn at all. So all of them implement this standard consensus averaging dynamics. But in the first situation, depicted on the left top plot, the opinions on different issues, on beliefs in three statements, evolve independently. What we have in this situation? The upper plots correspond to beliefs in the first statement. So average member of American society really believed that Saddam Hussein had mass destruction weapons. However, people were not really sure at the second statement that those weapons really threat the world stability. So the average belief was about 50%. And there was no support of American invasion to Iraq, American invasion of Iraq. So it was around 10%. Consider now the second situation where the structure described on the previous slide, such a matrix, is implied, is implemented. The outcome is completely different. So the dependency between the first belief and the second two belief leads to consensus on all of those three statements. Almost consensus, of course, so there is some interval of opinions, but society started to support the invasion. And those two plots more or less corresponded to the opinion polls before Colin Powell's speech and after Colin Powell's speech. The situation could be completely different if the American society had a very small amount, for instance, 1% of fully stubborn agent, having consensus on all three opinions and holding, in fact, identical opinions on all these three issues. They could completely overwhelm these dynamics and attract the other's opinion. Of course, this is just a simulation on a random graph. And actually, you understand that real society is not as densely structured in general. So how should we inject those stubborn individuals is a non-trivial problem. Just a few words about results uncovered by my talk. So Hideaki already mentioned works on gossiping, which also can be applied to Friedkin-Johnson model. So you can consider a model where agents interact asynchronously. There are some extensions of PageRank centrality closely related to Friedkin-Johnson dynamics. In fact, they're generated by a dual system. And they are reported in our conference paper published in the previous year. Also, in your conference back, you have the volume of on-mail reviews and control, including part 1 of the tutorial. So I am still ending part 2 of it. And actually, the vision paper to which Roberto and myself also contributed. So, to finish my talk, I would like to say that it was a precious gift of destiny to meet such a person as Roberto, who was not only a rigorous scientist, but also a kind teacher for me and true friend. So I am very thankful, I am very grateful for all experience, all knowledge, all emotions he shared with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anton. And this brings us to the closure of the session. And Roberto, of course, will live in our memories, and his contributions will remain in our archives forever, many generations. And again, as I indicated at the beginning, the community lost a perfect person, a scientist, an engineer, an educator, and someone who was dedicated to his profession. Thank you.